Hello everyone and welcome back. Last week we looked at the Study Jams program, the structure of the course and how to follow along with these sessions. This is session 2 of the Study Jams program, the new to programming track. For anyone new who's joining us this week, I'll just give you a quick tour of the website. Posting this link in the chat as well. So when you visit the website, you'll have two courses. Right now, we're doing the first track at the course. Then we'll have 2 units here. We're doing the first unit. And in the first session, we completed the first 3 pathways. These are called pathways. And today we'll be doing the 4th pathway. Just to give you a quick recap, a pathway has certain activities to do. They have something called code labs, which are basically programming exercises, and you have a quiz at the end. So let's get started. The prerequisites, the main prerequisite for this session is that you've completed the first 3 pathways in the course. And here's a look at today's schedule. First, there'll be a recap of this session 1, and we'll take a look at the exercise I gave out last week as well. And then we'll go through each of the concepts required for the pathway 4, and I'll be walking you through the code lab and explain the code as well. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. If any of you have any doubts, you can ask. Now, let's start off with a quick recap of last week. Like I said, we'll take a look at the exercise as well. Would anyone like to recall what we talked about? Does anyone want to quickly talk about the name of the topics we touched upon last week? All right. So we looked at some basic programming concepts. We set up Android Studio and learned about some of the UI components used while building an Android app. Some of the other concepts that I talked about in the first 3 pathways were variables. And variables are like storage boxes for certain values that can be used later on in your program. This is basically telling the program that, hey, here's this value that I'll be using quite often in my program, and I don't want to type it out each time. So I'm giving it a name. And whenever I use this name, it means I'm using this value. Think of it like a shortcut or an alias where you're using a shorter version of something. And when your program is executed, what actually happens is that wherever the name of your variable appears, it's replaced with the value. An example, here's how we declare a variable, which basically means we tell the program that we'll be using a variable like this. This is how you do it in Kotlin. So this reads var size equals 6, which basically means you have a value 6. And you'll keep using it throughout your program. So what you want to do is you want to give a storage container and say that this contains the value 6. And wherever you use the term size, the value 6 will be used. It's kind of like taking a box with a name and putting a value in the box. Another concept that was talked about in the first 3 pathways was functions. Functions in programming are very much like functions in math. Given an output, the function processes the given input. Given an input, given an input, the function processes the input according to a formula and gives you an output. Functions in programming have a little bit more to them. Instead of processing the input according to a formula, there's a piece of code that gets executed. And functions don't always have to have inputs like in math, where you have to provide something. In programming, you don't always have to give an input. And similarly, functions don't always have outputs. In the world of programming, inputs are referred to as parameters and outputs are referred to as return values. Lastly, data types were one of the other concepts discussed in the pathways. So data types are basically certain classes applied to different categories of values you can have in a program. Meaning, when you're writing a program, you can use a lot of values. All the value, any value you want, you can include. Like you can include numbers, decimals, fractions, words, truth values. And to keep things easier for us and for the program who's going to execute it, we've assigned each of these values certain categories. And those categories are called data types. For example, if you want to use integer number, there's a data type called int. And if you want to use any word, like the name of a student or the name of a food item, you'd use something called string. And there's a special one called Boolean, which can only take two values, true or false. And we'll see how this is used later on in this session. One more thing to keep in mind is that data types are actually assigned to variables, meaning that when you declare a variable, you tell the program that this variable will only accept this data type. So here, when I declared size, ideally in Kotlin, you would declare that size will only have integer values. So you can have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And if you try to give it a value of another data type, it will actually throw an error. And we'll look at this as well. You might be wondering how come I didn't mention anything here that says it has int. This is what's called type inference in Kotlin. If the value you're giving to your variable is unambiguous, meaning there's no doubt about it, Kotlin can know and realize that you want to keep it as an int. So here I clearly gave a number 6, so it knows that you only want to give int. If I gave var name is equal to Android, then it would know that Android is a word, so it will automatically assign the variable the data type string. Yeah, and we also looked at views, which are one of the components of an Android app. That's as far as the recap goes. Now, I gave you guys kind of an exercise last time. We'll quickly take a look at that. The exercise was basically to modify the text style a bit, change the background image and make it colorful or change the style of the text. Just to check, how many of you did the exercise or tried it out? Show of hands. Would any of you like to share what you did with the birthday app? If so, you can keep raising your hands and I'll let you present. All right. So for the people who couldn't figure it out, I'll show you the answer now. Let's just wait for the. Yeah, so this is what the original birthday app looks like. And if you wanted to change the size or color, there are certain properties of each of the views you have in your screen, and they're called attributes. So I think I asked you to change the color. So for that, what you would do is just pick any color you want, and it will change. And you can even change the size. You can enter your own size. Yeah. And here is a text style. You can make it bold, italic. And as far as the background image goes, this is where the source for the image comes from. So all you have to do was click this here. This is what gives you the source, and pick any one of your image or any other image you wanted. That's all for the exercise. Now let's get into the actual today's session. So today's goal is to build a dice roller app. When you hit roll, when you press roll, it will change to a different number dice, and it's always random. So you could click roll, you get a dice facing with the number 2 or 1. And we'll talk about certain concepts and see how this app comes to be. Yeah, like I mentioned, we'll be doing pathway 4 today. Right, so after today, you'll be able to do a couple of things. With respect to Kotlin, you'll be able to generate random values. Like I mentioned just now, for the dice roller app, whenever you press roll, you'll get a random value. So there is some amount of randomness involved. So to achieve that, you will have to learn certain things, and that's one of the things you'll be taking away. Another thing, and this is one of the more interesting concepts out there, is you'll be able to incorporate real world entities into your program. What this means is, you guys know AMS, right? Our management system for Amrita. So Amrita, the AMS has students who can log in, and each student has their own, excuse me. Each student has their own profile and they have their own assignments and exams. But there are a couple of things common. Each student has a number of subjects, the fees to be paid or not to be paid, marks for each semester. All these things are common between every student, and the values for these change. Like for second semester, third semester students like me, like myself, I'll have the number of subjects as 7. Maybe for the first semesters, you'll have 6. And for my marks, I'll have a certain value, and other student, they'll have another value. So though they have common fields among them, these fields have different values. And all this comes under one topic that we'll be looking at later. And finally, with respect to Kotlin, you'll also be able to make decisions based on certain conditions through your program. So again, going back to our dice example, when you roll it, if it's 6, what should happen? Or if it's 1, what should happen? How does the program decide all this? We'll take a look at that as well. And as for Android, as far as Android goes, you'll be able to design screens for your app. I'll be talking a bit more about that. It was introduced in last week's session, but I'll formally introduce the idea of it to you. And you'll be actually able to add more functionality to your app. We'll be taking a look at the starter code that you get when you start an Android project, and we're exploring certain parts of it to let you understand how everything works. And you can mess around with it and add your own functionality. You'll be making it more interactive. Last week, we just had a simple screen showing an image and 2 pieces of text. Now you'll be adding buttons. You'll be adding one button. And when you click on the button, certain action happens. This is just the start of many ways you can add interaction to your app, and we'll see how that happens as we go on. And finally, you'll be able to integrate or add or include standard Kotlin code in your Android app. Right, now let's get started. How many of you play games? Board games, video games, arcade games, anything? I just want to see how many of you play in video games or board games. Show of hands. Right. And which ones have you played? If you don't want to speak up, you can put it in chat as well. It's fine. All right. Yeah. Monopoly, Snakes and Ladder. That's the board games here. Video games. Anyone play any video games here? Chess. Right. Right. Okay. How about any battle royale? Yeah. Okay. All right. So we have these games that. Is there any amount of luck involved in the games you play? Again, I'll go to chat. We played PUBG, Ludo, Monopoly, Snakes and Ladders. Was there any luck involved? Yeah. Right. Okay. Uh, how so? Yeah. How so? In what manner? How was there luck involved? For Monopoly, what's the luck factor? Was for Snake and Ladder, what's the luck factor? Or in for PUBG? Right. Yeah. So when you roll the dice, you don't know what you're going to get. Or in other words, it's random, isn't it? Or even when you play Monopoly, when you have to pick a certain card, you don't know what card you're going to get. And I believe for PUBG as well, you get certain loots loot drops, if I'm not wrong, in the middle of the game and containing weapons and stuff, and you don't know what you're going to get, right? So games have a element of randomness to them. Can anyone tell me, now that's for as far as games go, can anyone tell me where we need randomness in real life, where you'd use where randomness has an actual need and necessity in real life?
OTP generation.
Yeah, OTP generation, that's a good one. Anyone else? Lottery tickets, yeah, that too. You don't, the numbers we get, right? I think, okay, at least for the first year, I think closer to our college itself. Anything you get reminded of thinking of our college? Okay, so let's move on. These questions that I asked, they had all one central theme, randomness. And that just so happens to be the first concept for the session. So let's dive into a bit more detail. Yeah, so like Saket said, OTPs involve randomness, and even games, Uno. And I don't know if any of you have been to arcades or have seen this machine in general. It's a slot machine where you pull the lever, and if you get three of the same items, you win, or else you don't. So even the three items that appear on the screen of the slots are randomly decided. And like I said, in Battle Royale games, you do get drops here and there into a bit into the game. And they're randomly selected as well. That's as far as games goes. And now speaking with respect to real life, randomness has a place there as well. OTPs, like again, like Saket mentioned, and even password generators. Sometimes you want to generate a random password, or even, you know, going deeper, there are certain cases where when you enter a password, there's a certain way of storing them, which is you generate a random string and attach it to the password so it becomes more secure. This is a process called salting and hashing. And if you want, you guys can research more about it. It's a pretty interesting topic. Even the weekly shuffle that's going on right now involves randomness in that the pairs that are get selected, how the students are paired up, it's random, right? So, and as you can imagine, we need a way to generate random values in the program. So like if an app has to send out an OTP, it has to generate random number in the code. In a similar vein, the string I talked about that gets randomly generated to store a password also needs to be generated in the program. So how is it done? How are programs able to generate random values whenever required? And in 99% of the case, it doesn't repeat again. As it turns out, a lot of programming languages like Java, Python, and Kotlin come with an inbuilt random generator, which helps you generate random values either for a number or a string or anything you require, depends on the language. And in the case of Kotlin, the function random is used for this purpose. It returns a random number and doesn't require any parameters or input. We'll see how it's used later on in the code lab. Now, in the recap, we briefly looked at data types and discussed three of them: strings, int, and boolean. Let's talk about a new one, int range. When you declare a variable of type and give it the data type int range, you're assigning that variable a range of numbers. So if I say var range is equal to 1 to 5, that means that variable range contains the list of numbers 1 to 5. Again, we'll see how this is in code lab. This is just to introduce you to the idea of this particular data type. And just to clarify again, the int range data type is basically a range of numbers. Now, can anyone tell me what would happen if we used int range with random? Like if I declared a variable of int range data type and used random with it. Can anyone take a guess of what would happen?
Yeah, we will get the random values between what the numbers we given, we'll get those random values.
Right, that's correct. Thank you, Visruth. Yeah, so if we use random with int range, we'll get the random number within the range. Good job. Okay. Before we move on to the next concept, few more questions. What do all die have in common? I briefly spoke about this with respect to AUMS and how all students have certain common things. So in that regard, can anyone think what common properties of a die are, of any die you take? Right, faces, yeah. So not all die have 6 faces, but yes, number of faces is a common property. Anything else? Yeah, randomness is a property of them. So stuff like color or even the material that you use to build the dice, these are all common, right? Each die you take, it has a number of faces, a material is built with, and a color. These 3 properties change for different dices, but they're common. Now, are there any can you think of any other examples like this? No, not always. There are certain dice that have more than 6 faces. Yeah, yes. Okay, let me rephrase my question. So when I talked about AMS, I talked about AMS having certain properties for each student. So each student has number of subjects, number of exams written, number of marks he gained in a test, he or she gained. And similarly, each die has 3 common properties: the material it's built with, number of faces it has, and the color. Can anyone think of any other categories of things like this? Okay, hopefully what I say next will clear things up. So we just saw that there are certain things or categories of things like a dice that have the same properties for specific cases. So another example, just to help you connect with this concept, is a phone. Every phone you take has certain properties like the design, the memory, the battery power, the home button, how it's designed, the OS it uses. These are all, each phone has this. And when I say specific cases, I mean something like an Android device or an iPhone. So for an iPhone, the design is different, the memory is different, but it still has these properties. Similarly, for an Android phone, the OS would be Android, of course, and it would have a completely different design from an iPhone, and it would have different memory. Similarly, other specific cases for a phone would be the Motorola phones and LG phones and things like that. Another example could be if the category is fruit, then the specific cases would be orange or apple. Now, before we talk about the actual concept, I'll give you another example. This should really get you familiar with what I'm talking about here. Let's take a look at a house. And we can all agree that houses are built out of some material, have a certain number of floors, certain number of rooms, and are built in a certain location, right? And for specific type of houses, the value of these properties would change. For example, if you take a mansion, it could be made out of marble, so the property material would be marble, and the number of floors would be 3 or 4. That's the property having, and it could have multiple rooms, and it would be located somewhere outside the city. Whereas an apartment complex could be made out of a completely different material. Maybe the door could be wood, and it would have 2 to 3 rooms and would have 1 floor and would be located somewhere in the middle of the city in a urbanized place where there's lots of people. Now, I understand that the terms I've used were pretty vague, and that was on purpose. I didn't want to get ahead of myself, but let's define these terms properly. A class is, simply put, a blueprint or instructions of some sort to build something. To put it into context, the category I kept mentioning would be a class. So phones, houses, fruits, dice would all be classes. And just like a blueprint, a class tells you what you need to build something, but doesn't go into the details. This would mean the properties we talked about. So for a class, let's say a house class, the blueprint would mention you have to have material, you have to have certain number of floors, certain number of rooms and location. That's all it tells you. What this thing should be, that depends upon you when you're building the actual house. So if you look at this picture here, this could be a blueprint, which would be a class. And let's say it's for the die class. So it would have instructions saying each die has to have material to be built out of, number of sides and color. So when you're building, and that's how it would mention it. It wouldn't mention what material, how many sides, or what color. All those details come into picture when you're talking about the constructs, like when you're actually using the blueprint to build something. For example, if you use the die blueprint and you try to build this die, the properties would have the values such as follows. It would have 6 faces, 6 sides. It would be made of rubber and it would be red color. And for this dice, it would have the same 3 properties, but different values. So number of sides would be 10. The material may be plastic or wood, and the color would be beige. So a class or a blueprint, again, really mentions only what features or properties should be there. And the constructs or objects built from the blueprint take from it and go into the specificities of the mentioned properties, right? Now let's quickly revisit some of the examples we talked about with more rigid terms. In the case of the house will be the class, and material, floors, rooms, location will be properties, and mansion, apartment complex, villa would be the objects. And like I mentioned, each object has its own set of values for the properties. These concepts of classes and objects is very important and very relevant because almost anything in the world can be treated as an object. Now, can any of you give me some examples? Hopefully this clarified the concept a bit. Example of objects. Okay, so a few examples would be a user on any social media, a laptop, a plane ticket, like in the given image here. Every plane ticket has passenger name, from, to, gate, seat, flight, number, and date and the time. This is common for all ticket or boarding passes, and for each person, these properties fields value would change. So if I had one, it would be Sunil from Hyderabad to Bangalore, gate 615, seat 15C, so on and so forth. And even a dial, like I mentioned. Another thing the classes have, and we'll see this in the code lab soon, is there's something called constructors. So up till now, I've been talking about how each object of a class has certain properties. So this constructor is what helps you set these properties. There are 2 types of constructors, primary and secondary. And we'll only be focusing on primary constructors now. Secondary is a bit advanced and it's not really used that often. So all right, let's get started on the code lab. So how this is going to happen is I will scroll through the code lab and give you again just a small overview of what the concept is there. And I'll code out whatever's written there. So if you need, and then when you guys do it yourself along with the recording, you can scroll through the code lab at your own pace. So the first thing we'll be looking at is a random function, like I mentioned. I will initialize a variable called dice range with the range 1 to 6. Now this range is inclusive of both the numbers you put at the end, and this is the syntax. So next what we have to do is get a random number from this because that's what we require for the app. Yeah, so now you can see whenever I keep running it, it gives me different values. That's how you use the random function along with the int range variable. One thing note here is I've used var here and val here. The difference between both is that when you use var, you can change the value, and if you use val, you can't. So if I try to change the value for random number now, we should get an error. Yeah, see, it says val cannot be reassigned. So when you don't want your variable to change, you think it's going to be fixed, it's best to use val. And if you know that the value for the certain variable will keep changing, then you can use var. So it won't change. So that's as far as generating a random number. One more thing to note is that there's a certain way of printing called formatting. Yeah, so instead of normally in Java, what you would do is this, do this, but this is cleaner, so you can use this. Next thing to do is create the dice class. So like I mentioned, a class is a blueprint of things with certain properties in it. And just like fun is a keyword that signifies a function, class is another keyword, which is basically a special reserved word in any programming language that has a specific meaning. Class, like the name suggests, talks about class. And the class right now, the only property it'll have is size, and we've hardcoded to 6 now, and we'll see how it changes later on. Now that you've created the blueprint, it's actually now you have to actually create a object. And that's done. It's just like calling a function. This is a syntax. You give the name of the object and create it as an object of the class by mentioning the class name. One thing to note here is the naming convention for classes and functions. So for classes, you always start with a capital letter. And if you have multiple words, you use camel case. So if I said something like first dice, every letter of each word will be capitalized. This is mainly for readability purposes. Look clean. The camel case notation is applied is for functions also, but instead of starting with a capital letter, you start with a small letter for functions. Object, we can actually access the properties for the object we created. Yeah, so this is how you access the properties you have in a class. It's the object name with a dot followed by the property you want to access. Be careful here. You don't want to make any spelling mistakes, otherwise it will throw up an error saying the property doesn't exist. It is unresolved reference, meaning you haven't created this anywhere. So to be careful of. Yeah, one thing to keep in mind is along with properties for a class, you can even create functions in a class. Normally we have functions. We only looked at one type of function till now, which is the main function. We can have other functions as well, and you can include certain functions to be only part of the class. So you can only call them with an object of the class and not, not as you would normally. So the only function for the dice class would be roll. Like I mentioned in the app that we'll be building at the end, you'll have a roll button. So when you click roll, that function should be performed and give you the corresponding output. The way you do that is normally. And here, when we roll, we want to get a random number. So I can just copy this. We have this, we can access the function just like we access the properties. Yeah, so you can. Now this is fine. We created a class with a class called dice, and we have property of size, and we have a function that rolls. And we're printing the random number that we're generating. But sometimes in a program, it's more useful to return the value that you're generating so that whatever calls the function or whatever invokes the function can have the value and it can use it as necessary. So on the top here, right now we're only calling the function because it's only printing for us. what we can actually do is modify this function so that it gives back a value and we can capture that value here. So how that would be done? Yeah, this is what this is talking about, returning your dice rolls value. For this is the syntax for declaring what type of return parameter your return value your function would have. So now if you do this, it will give you an error because you said you would return something, you did. So we have to return a value. And we'll be returning the random number we generated. Now this we return the value now, but this is of no use to us right now because we're not capturing it anywhere. So if we run the program, nothing will happen. Do this when you assign a variable to the function you're calling, whatever it returns, it will be assigned to this automatically. And then we can print it from the main function itself. Yeah. Alternatively, you could do this. So instead of declaring a variable, you can directly print it. So now, like I said, here we hardcoded the property of the number of sides is 6. We can actually change it from here itself. So here, 1 second. So first it was 6 and then it was 20. Can someone tell me why there's no gap between both of them? Why are they stuck together?
Because we use just print.
Yeah,
If
so
we
how should
use
I?
println, then
Thank you. Thanks, Vish. Yeah, so just like Vish said, I changed it to println and it printed in two separate lines. So that's fine. You can change it whenever you want. But in real, this doesn't make sense from a real world perspective because what I'm doing is I'm constructing a dice from the class from blueprint, and now I'm saying I want to change the size. You can't change the size a die already has, right? You can't make a 6-sided die a 10-sided die. You have to, if you want a die with different number of sides, you have to get another one. So you have to create another object essentially, but we've hard coded the number of sides here. So how do we change that? That's where constructors come in. So like I said in the beginning, in the overview, constructors are what help set your properties of a object you create from a class. And this is what the next sixth stage of the code lab talks about. So much like a function, you give parameters to a function, parameters to a class as well. And when you do this, you can now assign the property again by so what will happen is just like when you create parameters, when you put parameters for a function, you'd have to specify them when you call the function. In a similar manner, you'd have to pass the value for the parameter for the dice class since we included the parameter. If we do it now, we should get an error saying, yeah, no value pass with parameter number of sides. There's a parameter here and it has no value currently. I guess it should work now. Yeah, so since I gave 6 here, what's happening is when this object is created, it takes from this blueprint and passes 6 as a value. So for this particular object, the number of sides the sides property is assigned this value that we pass, which happens to be 6 now. We can create another dice. So now for dice2, we initialize the class with the variable value 20. So for the dice2, side properties values, side property value is 20. Now there's one thing we still have to change. I made this general such that when each object we create can have its own number. So this is still fixed. How do you think we should change that? This is still 6. Give 20 also, it will give within 6. How do you give within the correct range? How do we fix that? Value 6 with the number sides, because this is also a number, it's just that it's a variable. So now whenever you roll, you will get within the correct range. And we can see that. Yeah. Always include parameters, the parentheses when you're calling a function. Others it will treat it as a property, which roll is not. Yeah, so for the first one, it gave within 6. And for the second dice, it gave above 6. So within 1 and 20. So that's why I got 11. So that's what the first code lab talks about. So this is what we've done so far. We created a class called dice with the constructor that sets the number of sides for you and a function that rolls it. Now there's a bit more to constructors, like I talked about primary constructor and secondary constructors. You can explore it on your own. I'll be sharing a few links after the session so you can explore, and based on that, if you want to go further, you can. But for this, for the sake of the session, this is what's enough. Another thing you can do is instead of, you can clean this code up a bit because some part of it is unnecessary. Instead of returning this variable you assigned, you can directly, that's just the, or further, you can remove this as well because we're already capturing the value, the number of sides in the parameter itself. What we do is instead of this, let's check that our program still works. Yeah, it still works. So that's as far as the first code lab goes. What we've done till now is we created the logic for rolling the number of dice, x-sided dice, where x we can specify by creating an object with a constructor. And that's as far as the first code lab goes. Any doubts so far? So this is for the second code lab of pathway 2. Once I go through the concepts quickly, we'll again switch to the code and see how they use that. You may have used this already in the previous session, but I thought I'd give you an introduction to the layout editor of Android Studio. It's a part of Android Studio's built-in tools that lets you design the screens or pages of your lab. You can actually do this in two ways, either through a drag and drop mechanism or via code, where you change a code file. And we'll design screens using both these ways throughout the course, and I'll touch upon each of them at the appropriate time. So with the help of the layout editor, you can place your components, your UI components or views, just as how you want them to appear on a device. We briefly looked at view groups in the previous session, which is basically a view group contains multiple views in it. So it's like a box with certain items that placed in it in certain positions. The box will be the view group and the items will be the views. And there are actually different types of view groups a certain screen can have. It can have a table layout where all the views are arranged in a tabular form, or it can have a linear layout where all the views are arranged either horizontally or vertically. We'll be mostly dealing with the constrained layouts throughout the course, which I'll talk about also when we get to the code lab. But we can explore any other layers that we come across as and when we require. Now, another thing to keep in mind, this is an important aspect of the layout editor. Each view that you drag and drop into the screen should be assigned an ID, much like each student has their own registration number. But unlike a registration number, this ID doesn't have to be a number. You can give it a string as an ID as well. So if it's a button, you can give the ID roll button or something like that. You can think of it more of as a personalized name. We'll see how this is important to us later on in this session, but just keep it in mind for now. The role of an ID or what's called a resource ID doesn't end here. It goes past the layout editor, and we'll see how that is later on in the session. Finally, there are different ways you can position views with the editor. You can actually position them relative to each other, which basically means that you take one view and attach it to the other. So if the other view moves, the view you attach it to also will move. It's kind of like tying a rope to something, and if you move, the object will also move. You can also introduce something called constraints on views, meaning you can bound them or attach them or limit their movement to certain parts of the screen. We'll actually see that not placing constraints on a view will give you a warning from the editor rather than error. And we'll also see why it's important to pay attention to, and we'll see what happens if you don't place constraints. Just like last time, all these concepts we talked about on this slide will become clearer once we do the code lab, and I'll briefly go over them again then. So just to give you more clarity, this is what the layout editor looks like. This is the design, the drag and drop view or mode of designing the screen. And there's a code side as well, and I look at that also. Now over here in this image, it basically represents a relationship between the view group and the view. So it's a parent-child relationship where you can say that one view specifically belongs to a certain view group. So if you have different screens, each screen could have one view group or more than one view group. So each component in the screen belongs to one particular view group or one layout. Like I mentioned, these are the types of view groups. This is the table layout where everything can be placed in the form of a table or the shape of a table. And this is linear layout. So you place them linearly, either vertically like this, stacked below each other, or horizontally stacked next to each other. The final concept before we move on to the second code lab, and probably the most important one, is activities. Activities are where the UI designed in the layout editor that we just saw are displayed. Or in other words, an activity is where the UI is drawn. It can be thought of as a screen or page. Each screen has its own UI, and often most tabs contain multiple screens or activities. An activity usually takes up the whole screen of your phone, though there might be cases where it takes up only part of your screen. Again, it depends on how you design the UI. Now, to give you a bit more clarity, from the Teams mobile app that we have, and this is the Teams tab, and this is the settings tab. So each of these can be thought of as one activity. Here you have an activity tab, so that will be called activity. You have the chat tab, so that would be the chat activity and the assignment activity, calendar activity. And this is the settings activity. Literally each screen or each tab you can move, you can see the app is called an activity. That's how it is. It displays the UI different screens. Now, when you open an app, there's one activity that pops up by default. Or maybe in some cases, it could even be the activity you opened the last time you interacted with the app. The default activity for any app is called the main activity. If you take the case of YouTube, whenever you open it up, you'd be introduce the home page or the recommended page, and that will be the main activity because you always open that up. Because that always pops up when you open the YouTube app. Another thing to note is that you can move from one activity to another activity. Like I mentioned before, apps usually contain more than one activity. If you look at YouTube, you can switch from the trending tab to the subscriptions tab, or even again in Teams, you can move from the chat tab to the Teams app. How is that possible? How can you switch from one activity to another in the same code? Turns out activities can actually launch or start other activities. Now, these activities could be of the same app, like we just talked about in YouTube's case, where the subscriptions tab and the trending tab are all in the same app. Or you could even open up external activities of another app. So this is what happens when you open any link from WhatsApp. If you get an Instagram link and you click on the link, the Instagram app opens up. Or even any YouTube link. Again, if someone sends you a link, you'll open up the YouTube app, or even if you try to open up any document, if you try to open up a PDF, the PDF reader for your phone that you have installed opens up. Now all this is fine. When you open up an app, it has a default activity and you can even launch other activities. Excuse me. But for some other apps like Instagram, the default activity would be your feed. Yet the first time you open it, you could be met with the sign up or login activity. And until you log out, every time you open that app, you'll be met with the home page. How does this happen? How does the app know which activity should be launched and how is it decided? Well, all the activities of an app are listed in this special file called the manifest file. And we'll again take a look at this later on. And this is where it's decided which activity launches first. And by default, it's the main activity since it's included in the starter code for any Android project. So in the case of Instagram, the login activity could be the main activity or the first activity, or even the home page could be the first activity, and you could decide when to open which based on whether or not the user is logged in. The later part, the last part I just mentioned, is a bit more advanced, but there are ways to do it, and you can check them out once you've gone a bit deeper into the course. So that's all the concepts required for CodeLab 2. All right, so I'm creating a new project for. This is for anyone who's just joined us today and doesn't know how to create a project or isn't familiar with the Android Studio. I'll just be quickly walking through how you can do it. So while that sets up, the first thing we'll be doing is creating the layout of the app. So as you saw in the preview I showed you, there's an image and a button. But for now, we'll be starting off with just a text. So when you click the button, a text will display. That's the first thing we will be doing in this code lab. Then towards the end of this code lab, we'll make it such that when you click the button, a random number is generated and that number appears on the text, in the place of the text instead of just a hard-coded number. Right, so this is what the layout editor looks like. And as you can see here, this is the design mode. This is what the code looks like. And you can even do a split. So you can add the code here and see how it reflects in the design mode. The first thing to do, we'll add a button. The way you do that is you have your palette here, which basically contains the most common components, or it's arranged by category as well. So all the text related components, all the buttons, and like I mentioned, layouts. We'll be using the constraint layout, which basically means you can place constraints on other views. And you can even change the layouts like this, but we won't be doing that for the time being. We'll be sticking to constraint layout. So let's start. The first thing to do is pick up a button and place it here. And this is the ID I mentioned. So this is called the resource ID, and each view has a unique one. And normally it's convention to name it something that makes sense about it, or what, like based on what the view does. So for us, in this case, in the dice roller app, the button will be performing the function of roll. So I'll name it and you can see it gets reflected here. This specifies the type. And you can even change the link. You can even change the link sorry, the text that appears on the button here. Roll. And yeah, so it appears here, it gets reflected here. And now this is what it looks like. Next, we have to do, at least for now, is add a text. So as of now, this text will display whatever number our program generates. And again, you can give it a view, resource ID, and I'll call it random number because that's what it displays. So one thing that interesting that Android Studio has with respect to the layout editor is that sometimes text always doesn't appear. Like in our case, until and unless we roll the die, the text won't appear. So you can remove it. And when you do that, it's basically gone. But still, while testing, you might want to see how it's placed or how it looks like with respect to the screen. So for that, there's this attribute that's called, it's basically test texting. So you can type something here. Our text will be displaying only numbers. And what this does is this will only appear when you're coding. So when you actually run the app, nothing will be there until you put something there through the program. But just for testing purposes, you can keep this here. And that's the purpose of this little this attribute with the called text with the wrench logo next to it. You can even put it in the middle, just like how you do in Word or PowerPoint. You can just put align it to the center, middle, left or right. Now, here you can already see that there are errors here, basically, which is, and it says yeah, it says the view is not constrained. It only has design time positions, so it will jump to 0, 0 at runtime unless you have the constraints. What this means is, since the view is not constrained, meaning it is basically free to move, and it only has design time positions, which means these positions that we have right now are only fixed as long as they're in code. So once we actually run the program, it will jump to 0, 0, which is basically the start over here. We'll see what happens if we don't place the constraints. By the way, this is a virtual device. If your device doesn't have if your laptop doesn't have the required specifications, you can run it on a virtual device as well with the physical device with the help of a USB cable. Yeah, so you see how the button and the text went up to the corner, which is basically the 0, 0, like it mentioned here. It will jump to 0, 0 at runtime unless we have the constraints. That's the importance of constraints. You have to have them so they stay in place even when you run the program. The way you do that is at the corner, the four corners of any view you add to the screen or activity, there are these four dots, and you can constrain them in different positions to the different sides of the screen. So if you do that, you can do this. So now you can see that this is the warning went away. What I did here is that I attached the top of the button to the bottom of the text. This is called text view. So this is what I mentioned about relative positioning. So if we move this, even this will move. See, so I dragged it here and it moved along with it because it's attached to the bottom of that particular view. Now similarly, we have to attach this as well. Yeah, so now the error went away, and if we run it, we should have it in the middle. Let's just check once more. Yep, now they're in the right place, and as you can see, the text hasn't appeared because we removed it and we just kept the test text to see how it would look like. You might be wondering what this caution symbol is. Basically, here this ID that I've given. So the text I've given for this button is hardcoded, meaning I put it in there and it's just a value, not a variable name. And what the recommended practice is that any string you use, it should be under a variable name. So in case you use one string a lot of places, if you want to change it, instead of changing in each place you used it, you can change it directly at the source of the variable and it will be fixed everywhere. So this is called the string resource, and there's a specific file called strings.xml where this will be stored. So I'll show you what that is in a second. This is the resources folder, and if you go to values, you'll have strings. So you can see here that we have one string called role under the name role, and we have a variable called app name as well, which is dice roller, which is the project's name. So now if you go back here and you look at the text field, it says add string /role. So what this basically means is it's accessing this file, and under this file, whichever and the value it will be displayed here. So now it's error free. Let's see what the next thing is. Right, so the next thing we'll be looking at is, activities. So this is what the activity code that comes with the project you created in Android Studio. And by looking at the file, we can see that it's a Kotlin file. So it's by the KDE extension, we can see it's a Kotlin file. But something is missing. From all that we've done till now, all the Kotlin programs we've written, something seems to be missing. Can someone point out what it is? Look closely, and there's something that's very fundamental that's in the programs we've written till now, but it's missing here. Can anyone spot that? That's correct, yeah. Yeah, Vasudharani, it's the main function, that's correct. So the thing is, Android apps run differently. Like how we have the main function as the starter point for our code in Kotlin programs. In Android apps, we have this function called onCreate, which basically replaces the main. So as you can probably guess from the function name. When the app starts up, this is whatever code is under here gets executed. So this serves as the entry point, just like main does in a Kotlin program. Don't worry too much about what everything else means. We will just, look at all this whenever the time is right. But for now, just know that for Android apps, you don't have a main function, you have an onCreate function, and that's what replaces main basically. Yeah, one more thing to do is there are certain libraries or certain external pieces of code that have already built-in functions that you'll be using, and what we do is we import them. Basically means we include them in our code with this statement. So as and when you add new things, they'll get automatically added to your code if you enable something called auto imports. And the way you do that is the steps are given here, so you can go through that when you're doing it yourself. I've enabled it already, so that's a no problem. Now, next thing is in our app, if you remember, the main purpose is when the button is clicked, something should happen. In our case, the dice should be rolled and the correct image should be shown. So the first thing to do is to make the button interactive. And this is where the resource IDs I mentioned become useful. So what we actually do is, as you can see here, this is the syntax we'll be using. I'll explain what this means in a second. Yeah, this is another feature of Android Studio. It auto-completes stuff for you. And yeah, as you can see here, I'll remove this. When I hit button, it will get auto-imported. So this is what the advantage is if you enable auto imports. Otherwise, you'll have to manually import it yourself. So what this syntax means is that you have basically the first thing you note is that this particular file is attached with this screen. So through this one line, you're saying that whatever you're doing in this activity is linked to all the components you have in this activity main file, right? So you're basically saying you're attaching the component, which is a button, to a variable. So find view by ID, which, as you can probably guess, you're finding the view in this layout by its ID, and whatever ID I gave it there is the ID we gave here. So that's the significance and importance of resource IDs in the layout editor or in Android Studio as a whole. This is another reason why you should name them properly. If you have many buttons or many views, you don't want to get confused which one is talking about which. So I've initialized a variable called role button, and it's of type button. So each of the views you have in Android Studio are data types as well. So basically, role button, the value, variable, whatever I initialized here, is attached to this component here. So we can make it interactive through this button. To make it interactive, we'll have to use something called an on-click listener, which basically means it's a type of an observer that you attach to any view you initialize. And what it does is it sits and waits there until your view is interacted with. So if someone clicks the button, in this case the component is a button, whatever code you write in that listener will be executed. See, there are lots of listeners here. The one we'll be interested in for today is the on-click listener. Yeah, so this is how you attach an on-click listener to the button. So when the button is clicked, because we attached the on-click button, a listener, whatever code we write inside here will be executed. You can think of it as a special function that only gets called when the button is interacted with. Like I mentioned, there are plenty of other listeners, like on success listener, on failure listener. We come across those listeners as we come across, but for now, this is enough for us. What I've done here is create a toast, and a toast is basically a small message that appears at the bottom of your screen when you've done something. Maybe in certain apps you've seen, whenever you sign in successfully, there'll be a little message that pops up for a while saying sign in successful. Or maybe in certain apps you might have seen, maybe in games, game applications, you might have seen double tap to exit or something like that. So that message that pops up for a while is called a toast. And the reason I ensure that the button and the on-click listener is working. And this is the way you create a toast. And these are the parameters. Don't worry about them for now. Basically, this is the text that will appear on the toast. And this is for how long it will appear. There's no you can't give your own number of seconds. It's either for a short duration or a long duration, and these have already predefined values. So I chose short, and this is another step, which is to show the toast. So we'll see if it works. Yes, as you can see, the toast appeared, so it's working. If I make changes to long, it will appear for a longer time. Alternatively, what you can do is, instead of creating a variable and assigning the toast type to it, you can this. Here, instead of creating a variable and showing through the variable. It still works. So that's how you make a toast. So the next thing to do is, instead of updating, just making a toast, is actually update the text. And we'll do that now. Similar vein of how we attach the role button value variable to the button in the layout, we're attaching the random number variable to the text view in the layout, again through its ID, which we've given here. So this is the ID we've given, and this is the exact same thing we've used here. So what I've done in this line is just simply update the text on the screen with the value 6. So when we click the button, first it will show the toast now. Create this random number variable and attach it to the text view on the screen, and then update the text of the text view to 6. So we'll see how that works. Yeah, you can, as you can see, the number 6 appeared. So if you, as of right now, it's hard coded, meaning I put it there myself. It's not any general thing. So no matter how many times I click roll, it will still update it to 6. The next thing to do would be to actually add the dice roll logic that we implemented in the first code lab, which, if you remember, it generates a random number and gives you the random number. So naturally, the next step would be to add that logic, and this is what I meant by when I said you can incorporate Kotlin logic today. So the standard Kotlin code we wrote in the first code lab, we'll be using it here. We'll create an object of the dice class, call the function roll, and then get the number back and update it here. So let's do that. So since we've already gone through this, I've just copied the code. It's the same thing that we did last in the first code lab. I'll just quickly run through the code just to make sure you guys understand it. So like in the first code lab, we created a class called dice, and it takes in the parameter or constructor to initialize the property of the number of sides. And there's one function called roll that returns an integer, and it returns a value between 1 and the number of sides we give, and it takes a random number from that and it returns it. Let's say we're calling this function. So here we created another function, roll dice. This isn't actually necessary. You can keep this code here itself, but to make things more neat and organized, we've done that just for the sake of readability and ease of navigating through the code. So we initialized an object of the dice class with the number of sides as 6, and we've called the roll function and attached it to here. And we can actually just copy. So this is, again, we've attached the text view present in the layout to this variable random number, and whatever number we got here, we have to replace it with the text on the screen. So like we did with here, we made it as 6. We hardcoded as 6, but now we're making it general by saying that the text in the random number is equal to the dice roll, whatever value we get here. This toString method is to make sure that because we get an integer here, we're just converting it to a string. In Kotlin and in other many languages, there are certain types that you can switch between. It's called typecasting. So int and string are one of the interchangeable types. Hence, we've used this method to convert the number to a string. The only thing left to do is call this function in listener, because it has to. Right now, nothing will happen because the code for the click listener is empty, and all we have to do is call it. One more thing is, you might be wondering what this is. So this basically means that private basically means that this function can only be called from within this class. If you call outside the class, it will throw an error. Try to call the roll dice anywhere within this class. Basically, it's recognizing that this function exists in this class. But if I try to do it somewhere else, then it will give me an error saying that this function doesn't exist because we're trying to call from another class. This is used when you don't want any function being accessed from another class. If you want to keep things private, maybe in any app you're building, you want some feature of security, or you want to store some passwords or something. You don't want anyone else to see them. Anyone else in the sense, any class or any other property can't access, any function can't access it, then you would use this. So yeah, let's test out this app and see how it works. Yeah, as you can see, if you click roll, it changes. So what's happening here? Let me just move this. One second. Oh, sorry. Let me just Yeah. So what's happening when you click roll is that it is being activated, this set on click listener, and this roll dice is being called. And when the roll dice is being called, it creates an object of the dice class with 6 as a number of sides, rolls with the function, and when it does that, it gets the value from here and just displays it here. It's a bit small now. We can increase the size if we would like to. Yeah, it's a bit bigger, maybe a bit more. And in case you're wondering, SP is just a unit of size, like we have pixels. It's just for the text views. You can do a little more research and find out what exactly it is, but it's just a measure of size. Yeah, it's much bigger now, much clearer. So we're almost there. The last thing to add is an image. Actually, instead of text, we'll be adding images. And when we click roll with similar functionality, we'll be displaying the correct image. Yeah, this is, I think almost every code lab has this section where they tell you certain good practices you can adopt. So one of them is to add comments to make sure you or anyone else who reads your code understands what each line does. And that's as far as this one goes. Now there's only a little bit left. Like I said, we're almost done with the session. Almost on the app also. This is the final part that we'll be covering for the concept overview for the last 2 code labs, and we'll see what to do then. Now, the first time you tried to open your phone's camera for WhatsApp, you must have been met with a allow WhatsApp to access camera, yes or no pop-up dialog. Or the first time you opened up Swiggy or any other food delivery app like Zomato or Foodpanda and selected the use device location for delivery address, it must have asked you, allow Swiggy to use device location, yes or no. In the first case, if you chose yes, the camera app would have opened, else it wouldn't have. And in the second case, if you chose yes, your delivery address would have been partially filled out for you, else you wouldn't have had to fill in you would have had to fill in the whole thing yourself. How did WhatsApp or Swiggy know? How did they know what to do in both cases? How does the program decide what to do based on a certain condition? Enter conditionals. Conditionals are a programming language's way of letting your program make decisions when a certain condition is met. 2 of the most well-known conditionals present in most, if not all, programming languages are if and else. So when a certain condition is met, the if condition is executed, and if the condition hasn't been met, the else condition is executed. So in the example we just talked about, the code would probably look something like, if response is yes, open camera, else don't. And even in quizzes, this concept is employed, where you have a certain question, and if it's correct, you display a certain screen, and if it isn't, you display another screen. So here, if you click 15, which is the correct answer, you will probably get a green highlight. Others, you get a wrong one. Now, there could be certain situations where you'll have more than 2 alternatives to a decision. And in that case, there's another condition available known as else if or if else. It varies on the language. An example for this could be rolling a dice. If 1 is rolled, do this, else if 2 is rolled, do that, else if 3 is rolled. You get the idea. But if there are many alternatives, this could introduce many if-else statements in your code, making it cluttered and clumsy and hard to read. Fortunately, Kotlin offers a solution for that through another conditional, and this is the last one we'll be talking about today, and it's the when conditional. How the when conditional works is that we give it one variable, and it checks the value of the variable against the predefined values that you'll be placing in the when conditional, and if any of them match, it will execute the particular value's code. For example, if you pass the random generated number from our function to the when conditional, and it will check something like this. When the value is 1, show 1. When the value is 2, show 2. When the value is 3, show 3, and so on. Again, with this concept, as with every concept I've done so far, things will become clearer once we complete the program. So that's pretty much the concepts required for the fourth one, for the third and fourth one. So let's move on to the third and fourth code lab and finish off the session. So this is some starter code. What we've basically done here is initialized variable num with the value 5, and we've written a certain conditional. Can someone tell me what the output is going to be? Can someone guess? Yeah, can someone guess what the output will be if I run the program? All right. Yeah, that's correct. Yes, thank you, Sneha. So yeah, since the num, this is what I meant by comparing. So I printed the variables greater than 4. Let's run through the flow once. So the value has variables. The variable num has the value 5, and it checks if the value that variable num holds is greater than 4, then only execute this. In the case that it isn't, don't do anything because we haven't given the condition for that yet. So since that's all it has now, it will print this. But if I give, let's say, something like 3, nothing will happen because we don't have anything written for that case here. And this is where the else. So what it does now is it takes the num variable we've given, replaces with the value 3. So essentially this question is being asked here is, if 3 is greater than 4, print this, else print this. So if you run this now, it will print variable lesser than 4. Here we should give 4. So we should ideally give less than equal to, but yeah, that's how the flow works. And quickly, just to show you how the if-else code works and how it can get messy. Let's yes, I forgot to do that. Let me just right. So we can print it now. So what I want to do is I'll explain the code after I write it out. Let me just do it once. Doing here is we're getting the value for the rolled dice, and we're checking. So there are 6 possible conditions, right? Either you get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So what I'm doing here is I'm checking if the dice roll, if it's equal to 1. So let me explain the statement a bit here. Up till now, you've only seen this equal sign, a single equal sign, and that's used to assign a value to a variable, or say tell the program that this variable that I'm creating, this storage box or this container, will hold this value. That's called assignment. You're assigning a value to a variable. This, however, this double equal to is what's called it checks. It checks if the value on the right is equal to the value on the left. If it is, it gives out a boolean called true. So remember that we talked about the data type boolean, and this is where the significance kicks in. So this, what this will evaluate to, if let me run the program and show you. So it printed 3. So basically we got 3 here. So here, when the program checked if dice roll is equal to 3, and it was, it will give out the value as true. So this checking operation always returns a value, true or false. Since in this case, since it was true, this was executed. And that happens with all these conditionals as well. So each time a conditional is checked, in this case, since diastole was 3, this would have given back the value false. So since it's false, it won't execute. Similarly here, and since it came here, it was true and it executed it and it stopped. That's another thing. If you have a lot of these conditionals, and if at any point of them, one of them evaluates to true, it will stop there, the execution there, and won't bother checking the other ones. Actually, sorry, no, that's my bad. It will still go through and check each one, and if there's no other one that matches, then it will stop. So now I've written almost 6 conditions here, and it looks quite messy. So this is what I was talking about before. If you have too many alternatives for a certain decision or a certain output, an action, it will look messy with all these brackets and stuff. And that's where the when conditional comes in. Yeah, so here also it looks very dirty. Let's see how the when condition can improve things. Like I said, the first thing to do is pass in a variable. In the case of the when conditional, else is kind of like a default case. So if any of these cases don't match, it will resort to this one. So yeah, it still works. Now this looks much better, doesn't it, as compared to the previous method of using if-elses. Now, small question. Can anyone tell me what this resembles in Java? People who have some experience with Java. Can anyone tell me what this reminds you of in Java? Yeah, switch case, that's right. So switch case is very similar syntax. Thank you, Sneha. So that's about ifs. That's all about conditionals, if, else, and when. So now it's time to actually use this in our app and bring out, I think you can probably already start to see how it will look like the code. So let's see how that's done. This brings us to the final code lab for the session in the pathway. So now the first thing we have to do is get rid of the text because we'll be using image. And so let's do that. You can simply click out and delete. Sometimes you might have to search here if it's not already present. Yeah, it's already in the column. Normally it will ask you to select which one you want, which image you want to show. So for now we'll select this. And again, since I removed the text, since I removed the text view, the button lost one of its constraints because the third constraint was attached to the bottom of the text view. So it's showing error for both. Let's quickly add those. Yeah, so the error, the warning it's throwing here is called missing content description attribute, which basically means when you have for certain phones, you have screen readers, right? Which basically, if the image doesn't appear or if the image isn't there, it'll read it out. Or even if you're going through some document and you have a screen reader, you'll read the text, and if it comes across an image, normally what we do is we set a description for the image. So instead of, since it can't read an image, it will read the description. That's the error it's giving us here. We can ignore it for now. It's not too much of an issue. Now the next thing to do is add the images. You can open the URL, you get a zip file, and you can download it wherever you want to, and you'll have to. You can add it wherever you want, and you'll anyway have to import them into this project, and we'll see how that's done now. So what you want to do is, if you look here, there's something called the resource manager, which basically lets you import or rename or delete any images you want to use. And images in the context of Android apps are called drawables. That's all that the word drawable means. And here we can already see there's an option called import drawables for us. As you can see, dice the 6 dice images are being imported here. Click import, and you should see them here. So let's replace this image with one of the dice images just to see how it looks. You can choose any one. Yeah, it's a bit too big. Let's fix that. Yeah, so as you can see, they've given us a fixed width and fixed height. So we'll set that. How you do that is once you click on this, you can already see it. We're pretty close to the given. And like text has SP, height, images have DP. Yeah, it looks much better now. Let's see what the next step is. Right, so now that we deleted the text view, this is throwing an error because that doesn't exist anymore. So we'll quickly remove this. So like how we access the images, the views with their IDs, we can access images with something called drawable. So here we said r.id.the ID for the view, and here r.drawable.the name of the image. So set image resource is just a method that lets you change the image of the corresponding image view, and we declare it here just like how we declared previous views with their corresponding IDs. And yeah, just to make sure, we can do this as well, which basically sets the content description for the image with the corresponding number. Yeah, so since we did that, it should be fine. We can change this to 6 just to be sure. Yeah, as you can see, when you click roll, it changes the dice number. And one thing you can actually do is, if you want, this is not compulsory. When the app creates itself, let me just move this. So when you start the app itself, you can have a dice at the ready. So it will look a bit more better. Right now it looks empty without any dice there. You can just call the already built-in function. So when you start the app, this will be called once more, and it will give you the random number instead of fixed one each time. Yeah, so every time you open the app, it will give you a random number. here is 5 last time and now it's 4. And one last thing before we close. There are certain ways to make your code cleaner. So you can go through all those later on at your own pace. And yeah, that's it. That's all we have for today. Quickly before we close, just a small recap. Today you learned how to generate random values for in the Kotlin program. You learned how to incorporate real-world objects or entities into your program through classes and objects. You also looked at how to make decisions based on certain conditions with the help of conditionals. And as far as Android was concerned, you learned how to, you got a little more better look at the layer editor. You can now edit the main activity code and add functionality to it by attaching views to certain variables by the find view by id method, and you can even import images to your app and use those as well. And lastly, you learned about making components interactive by setting listeners to them. Actually, that reminds me, this is the manifest file that I was talking about. So here there's only one activity currently, so that's what's listed here. And there are certain things called intent filters, and we'll learn about that later on. So as you can see here, it says category.launcher. So this is what sets the main activity to be launched first. So ideally, if you had more than one activity, you could cut this out and paste it under another activity. So that activity will be launched first. Maybe if you want, I can quickly show you. Just, then main activity 2. Activity. If you look at the Android manifest, now you'll see there's another one here. And if I look here, start activity started. I'll just drop a text view quickly, just to show. And if you remove all this part here and add it here, this should launches first instead of the main activity we just saw. Yeah, as you can see, this starter activity popped up instead of the main activity popping up. That is because we changed the property and set the launcher activity to starter activity. And that's how the manifest file, it contains all these kind of properties, and we'll see what other things we can include here or change here later. Right, so that's all for today, and like last time, you guys to do is create a rectangle class. The dimensions for the rectangle and carpet size should be passed as parameters. The class should be able to calculate parameter and area. And once you do this, you should check if the rectangle of given dimensions can cover the given carpet. So that's where the carpet size of carpet area would come into here. So based on this, you can create the necessary properties and functions, create 2-3 objects, change the property values, and call the functions in the main just to test your class. And this is also, you can do it similar to the dice roller app. You can create a coin tosser. So you'll have much less code, but this is just to familiarize yourself with the concepts we learned today. So for session 3, we'll be building something like this. It's a tip calculator where you enter the cost, the total service, whether it be maybe a haircut or any restaurant you've been to, and you can select the quality of the service, and based on that you can calculate the tip amount. You can even round it up or not. I can even show you a quick yeah. So another thing that you can look forward to is we'll be adding themes to the app. So right now it's green, and this will change if you have it in dark mode. And so here you can see, yeah, right now it's the roundup tip isn't selected, so it's showing decimal point. But if you do, it should 44. So, and we'll be adding little. We'll be focusing more on the UI aspect next week, the design of it, and we'll be even including the logo for your app. Up till now, if you run the app on device or even the virtual device, you'll see that all the apps you created have the same logo like this. So from next week onwards, after next week's session, you'll be able to add your own logo. And apart from that, like I mentioned, color themes and for both light mode and dark mode. So yeah, that's it. You can share what you want with this hashtag. I'll be sharing a few resources to pertain to what we talked about today, including the data types and other things. So you can check them out and explore. Thank you.